Hey everyone, welcome back to the Imperial Minis channel. This is Randall, and today we're following up our tier list video of Stark and Baratheon units in the Brotherhood with a tier list of neutral combat and non-combat units in the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is subject to the same 12-point neutral allowance as every other faction, so it's useful to know which units to consider in a Brotherhood army and which to put back on your shelf. As in our last video, we'll rank units in order of their points cost in ascending order, starting with 5-point combat units. We're using a traditional S through D tier structure, where tiers mean the following. An S tier is a unit that's pretty much amazing in any list. A tier units are strong in most lists. B are usable in certain lists, so these are going to often be kind of commander and sort of list skew specific. C are units that are going to be weak in most lists, and D are those that are really just unusable in every list. So anything between S and B tier are things that you're going to probably want to consider. Anything in C and D, in my opinion, are going to not even be in contention. Since every faction can take neutral combat and non-combat units, or NCUs, this video will conclude with a tier list ranking of the neutral NCUs as well. Before we get underway, it's important to discuss a character rule that will affect some of these rankings. In our previous tier list video, we discussed the concept of opportunity cost and how it related to the rankings in that video. In this video, the character rule Unending Vengeance presents players with an opportunity cost dilemma. If your list includes either Catelyn Stark Commander or NCU, you are not allowed to take any of the units, characters, or NCUs described on this faction rule card. As a result of this rule, I am considering the opportunity cost of certain units, such as any Bolton unit or the NCU Walder Frey, into my tier list rankings. Taking any of the units named on this rule card means your army cannot take any iteration of Catelyn Stark in your army. That limitation will come into play in these units' rankings. Now, with all that out of the way, and without any further ado, let's get on with ranking the first unit. Alright, now the first unit are the House Bolton Cutthroats, a 5-point aggressive infantry unit. Now, normally I would rate these guys pretty highly. They are a good, cheap, very hard-hitting infantry unit. They have a very good dice decay profile. Being able to throw out a vulnerable is very useful. Vicious is good. But running these guys means that you can't take Catelyn Stark NCU or Commander, so really you're only running these guys in a Beric Dondarrion list or a Thoros list that does not run the Catelyn Stark NCU. I think the limitations are a little too great with these guys, and I don't think they bring enough to the table to warrant rating them highly just for the limited list building openings there are for them. So for these guys, I'm rating them all the way down into the C tier. The next 5-point infantry unit are the Stormcrow Mercenaries. So these guys are in a pretty interesting place. Normally I would give these guys kind of an average rating. They're not a very hard-hitting unit. They are a good natural fit for a kind of a utility attachment. You know, you can think like a Sandor Clegane threaten attachment. So they're kind of a good utility unit. You don't expect too much from them. But I think there's kind of a unique spot for them in the Brotherhood faction. The Brotherhood already reduces the attachment cost of one of your attachments by 1. So these guys come with adaptive, so you can kind of double dip that attachment discount to potentially use these guys to bring a free Gendry, for example. So you could, for 5 points, have these Stormcrow Mercs with Gendry, giving them resilience and improved defenses to make them a crazy, really high defense unit, all for 5 points if you're not bringing any other attachments. You could even put Lemon Cloak in them for free, even not even considering the Brotherhood attachment discount just on its own. Putting battle scars in these guys isn't terrible. I think these guys have a pretty good spot in the Brotherhood to either, like I said, either bring a really expensive attachment in them or just be a pretty decent, solid utility unit. So I'm putting them up in the A tier. The next unit is a unit that I have long looked for a place for in many lists because the sculpts are just so cool, and I just love what the kind of the design of these guys is kind of Greyjoy adjacent, even though they've been completely cast out of the Greyjoy faction, and I have no synergies at all with Greyjoys anymore, sadly. But the Lysine Sellswords are an interesting unit in the Brotherhood. I think they have some play in the Brotherhood, definitely. So if we look at Thoros of Myr Commander attachment, Thoros of Myr brings their kind of pitiful 7+ morale up to a 5+, which is pretty solid. And then once these guys get a pillage token, that increases their morale to a 4+. So their morale is going to be pretty solid. So they're going to be more reliably passing those morale and panic tests to get faith tokens. And then you can use the faith tokens to give these guys sundering and vicious. So they can pretty easily become a real offensive powerhouse, even though they are a little bit flimsy in the armor department. And then looking at another version of Thoros, you could throw the Thoros 2-point attachment version in them to give them relentless. And even though their morale is still not going to be great, you know, with one attack or with one pillage token, they're going to have a 6+ morale. But let's say they have two pillage, and you have Thoros in there. Every time these guys get hit, they can hit something back for free with relentless. And their pillage ability says after completing a melee attack, this unit restores 1 wound for each pillage token it has. So if somebody hits you, you can get a free attack back on them, and then possibly heal yourself off of that. So I think there's some interesting play with the Thoros attachment. It makes them an expensive unit for sure, but it's pretty interesting. It's pretty cool. I mean, what isn't there to love about pirates in the Brotherhood Without Banners? It just seems crazy, but pretty cool at the same time. And then looking at Beric Dondarrion 2-point attachment, with him you can get some pretty crazy high attack dice values here. So with him, if these guys are at full pillage, then you're always rolling your highest attack die value, which for them is going to be 8 because they get +1 attack die from having 2 pillage. And then Beric can spend a faith token to give them 2 more attack die, so you could be throwing 10 attack dice with critical blow, which, you know, with 6s turning into 2 hits, you can pretty easily see how you can have a massive hit with these guys, even if they're down to 1 rank remaining. And 1 rank remaining, but they have Beric and a faith token, these guys can just really come back from behind and do some pretty serious damage. So they do have a lot of cool synergies with attachments. That said, however, I think they are still a little bit of a list-dependent kind of niche unit, so I am putting them in the B tier. I was kind of wrestling with whether to put them in the A tier, but I think they really do require just the right attachment to do work. But I am excited about actually running them, so they are going in the B tier. Now moving on to the last 5-point unit, the Stone Crows. I don't have a lot to say about these guys. I don't think there's much of a place for them in the Brotherhood. They do have some extra healing on them. They're recruiting from the hills, which you could stack with some other healing effects from the Brotherhood. Insight can allow them to use their highest attack die value and vicious, but I just can't see a real reason to take these guys over something else in the Brotherhood, so I won't spend a lot of time on them. For me, these guys are going to be our first D tier unit, so yeah, that's where I think they belong. Moving on to 6-point units, our first one are the Bloody Mummer Skirmishers, and these guys were a bit tough for me to rank. I really like them, the idea of them in the Brotherhood faction. One issue I do have with them is their disrupt stacks with, or doesn't stack with the Peasant Levy, so there's a little bit of overlap there. If you have Peasant Levy in your front lines, these guys you could use instead of Peasant Levy for a couple points more. They don't have Gang Up, however. So you could maybe use these guys in a list with Peasant Levy, but just kind of have them on another flank, so that your whole army is disrupting things. And yeah, these guys were a tough choice for me to rank. Part of me wanted to rank them low, but I just think there's some utility for them in the Brotherhood. So I'm kind of just trusting my instinct here, and I'm going to put these guys in the B tier. Now our next 6-point unit are the Stormcrow Archers. Now these guys are going to naturally be compared with the in-faction Brotherhood Archers, who won't take up your neutral unit allowance, and who on their own are pretty good in my opinion. The Brotherhood archers have a ton of movement shenanigans going on, and now the Stormcrow archers could situationally be better if you're going after certain zones, and if you want to be able to throw out a vulnerable token when you shoot something. But they hit on a 4+ versus the Brotherhood's 3+. I think really the only place I would bring them is if I was running a Jokin commander list and put the archers in there with Jokin. Use Brother in Arms to make them shooting a ton of dice, but really that's just one situation out of many different situations that I could see running them. So I don't think there's enough options for them to justify even putting them in the B tier. So for me, these guys are going in the C tier. Now our next 6-point unit are the House Bolton Blackguards. And like the Cutthroats, these guys are affected by the Catelyn Stark faction rule, where you can't take them if she's an NCU or the commander. So really these guys are limited to a Beric Dondarrion list or a Thoros commander with no cat NCU list. These guys, their melee attack is pretty pitiful. It hasn't really kept up with the times. Their morale isn't great. You take them though for the horrific visage and their 3+ armor. Now, I can see some utility for these guys. I could definitely see throwing Tom 7 strings in them to give them taunt, so that if enemies are avoiding you, you can force them to come to you or force them to take a couple of tokens. So I do actually like the idea of these guys being up in your front line, possibly supported by peasants. So that's kind of mitigating a little bit their poor morale, or their poor melee, excuse me. And then throwing Tom 7 strings in them to probably not change the behavior of your enemy, but to just throw out a couple of free tokens every round. So I do like them. I do think they have a place. They're not going to be highly ranked for me, but they are going to go in that B tier. Now, moving on to a 6-point cavalry unit, the Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders. So, I think the Brotherhood, with the Brotherhood coming out, the time of the Zorse, has come. I'm pretty excited about what these guys can bring to the Brotherhood faction. These guys are very, very slippery. They want to be taking advantage of lots of movement shenanigans. These guys do not want to be bogged down in a melee. They want to get in, hit something, get out. And I think the Brotherhood is kind of designed to support that playstyle. If you look at the Brotherhood base tactics deck, they have cards like Sudden Retreat. So when these guys get attacked, they can pop smoke, get out of there. They can re-roll the retreat dice with their own ability, prevent that unit from pivoting. The unit becomes weakened. So retreating is definitely not dishonorable for these guys. You've also got cards like the Forgotten Fellowship, where you can start off a round by retreating these guys or marching them straight into an opponent's flank or rear, which will help the Zorse Riders get the most out of that Motley Armaments ability. And then again, the peasants are always a part of the conversation. If these guys charge into something with peasants involved, then they're going to be hitting quite a bit harder. So I think there's definitely a place for these guys in the Brotherhood. I'm going to put them in the A tier. For me, they're not S tier. They're not something you're going to bring in every list, but they're definitely something that is very strong no matter which Brotherhood commander you're bringing, and that's really what I think the A tier is for. A tier is for talking about, or putting those units in there that aren't commander specific necessarily. They're units that are good all-rounders in really any Brotherhood list, but aren't kind of the real massive powerhouses that are going to do great work in absolutely every list. All right, now moving on to a 6-point monster unit, the Golden Company War Elephant. Now, anybody that knows any of my other previous videos will know that I'm a huge fan of the Golden Company elephants. I try to shoehorn them into any list I possibly can. So I'm obviously excited for the potential these guys may have in the Brotherhood faction, or potential that I may try to force them to have in the Brotherhood faction. So as a quick refresher for folks, if you want to bring the Golden Company War Elephant, you're going to have to bring a Golden Company officer, because the elephant requires a Golden Company unit in your army to run him. So the Golden Company officer is a 2-point infantry attachment. So in a Brotherhood list, if you don't have any other attachments, that will only cost you 1 point. The officer comes with the new Boisterous Charisma to pass out vulnerable and weakened tokens when you pass a panic test, and you heal 1 with Dauntless when you pass a morale test. So I think the Golden Company officer as an attachment has maybe a little bit of play in the Brotherhood. I wouldn't bring him specifically just for his own card necessarily, but with the amount of morale test shenanigans in the deck and units with pretty decent morale, I think you could get some use out of the Golden Company officer just as he is. But in this discussion, he's going to be here as a vehicle for bringing the Golden Company War Elephant. Now, if we're looking at some possible pairings with the elephant, I see Thoros of Mir Commander as the natural home for the Golden Company War Elephant. He comes with Fiery Charge, which will guarantee that your War Elephant can get a 12-inch charge, and then once he charges something, he will panic them, which is good because he has vicious in his attack, so you'll have a better chance of causing panic wounds. Also, the Thoros of Mir Commander attachment has a pretty interesting faith ability. So when an enemy in long range fails a panic test, target 1 friendly unit in long range of this unit. For each wound that enemy suffered from this test, restore 1 wound to that friendly unit up to 3. So if this elephant was wounded before it attacked something, if it attacks something and that unit fails a panic test, if Thoros is close enough, after dealing panic wounds to a unit, this elephant could potentially heal some of those wounds back. And speaking of someone who's run elephants quite a bit, your elephants really end up being kind of a distraction carnifex, and your enemy really focuses on them quite a bit. So once your elephant is engaged, you can always expect them to be taking a lot of fire. So having an ability within your own commander's attachment to get some heals on them, I think, is a pretty useful. It's a pretty useful thing. And then if we look at, we can look at Lady Stoneheart, Catelyn Stark. If you throw the elephant into a list with her, she has Price of Failure. So, there's few things in the game as disappointing as finally getting a good elephant charge into an enemy unit, and then having that unit, your attack be weakened, or having you just roll terribly and then only get a couple of auto hits through. So with Catelyn Stark, you can, with this Price of Failure card, you could potentially get all of your hits through, and the defender won't roll any defense dice. So let's say you're charging into a unit that's also engaged with peasants. Again, the peasant conversation. You would potentially be doing 8 wounds without them rolling any defense dice at all. So slapping down Price of Failure, running the elephant in, boom, that's 2 out of 3 ranks just completely gone in an instant. So I think that's pretty cool that the elephant can almost have probably the same or better effect as a lance cavalry charge, which is pretty cool and fitting. So for me, the elephant, he's not going to be up there in the A tier or S tier. I'm going to hold myself back a little bit, but I'm definitely going to put him in the B tier. He's going to be conditionally a pretty fun and useful unit. So I feel good. I'm holding back a little bit, but he's going to stay in the B tier. Now our next unit is the 7-point cavalry unit, the Hedge Knights. So the Hedge Knights are obviously going to be directly compared with the Brotherhood Sworn Knights. So the Brotherhood Sworn Knights are 8 points rather than 7 points. They do have some of the same things going for them. They have similar attack dice pool. The Sworn Knights have a better 1-rank dice pool, but they both have the same upper limit of 7. They're both sundering all the time. They both have a movement speed of 5. The Hedge Knights have inferior armor and morale, but it gets equalized a little bit once you control the bag. But the Hedge Knights would arguably put out more damage if you control the sword, because you can make your opponent vulnerable. However, for me, the 1-point difference, really, I think the Sworn Knights are still a better deal, even with the 1 extra point. But I could see if you were running a multiple cavalry list, 2 cavalry units in an army, you could see the Hedge Knights making an entry as a good medium cavalry unit. We did already talk about the Zorse Riders, however, I think the Zorse Riders are a fantastic cavalry unit in this faction. So for me, the Hedge Knights they're good, but they're not going to be A tier like the Zorse Riders. I'm going to be putting them comfortably in the B tier. All right, now we're going to talk about the next Bolton unit, the House Bolton Bastards Girls. So these guys are a unit that is always ranked pretty highly in neutral lists, I would say, or in the neutral, among the neutral units. I would say these guys are generally considered to be a very good unit. They're definitely a scalpel kind of unit. They're not something you're just going to face check your enemy with. You really need to manage these guys quite well. But then in the Brotherhood, we have to go back to this opportunity cost question. You can't bring Catelyn in either of her forms with these guys. So, I'm thinking, well, what about Barrack? What can we do with Barrack? So if you want to throw the Barrack Commander attachment into these guys, I see these guys becoming extremely dangerous. So if you put Barrack in them, you're giving this unit Sentinel, and you're giving this unit Pathfinder, and you're giving a unit that already has a 5+ morale save duty to the crown. So I think Barrack synergizes extremely well with this unit. I could see running this unit in Barrack and performing quite well. These guys with Sentinel can kind of shimmy around to the flanks of your enemy, and then with charging volley I think you can do quite a lot of work shooting an enemy, charging into them. So for me, these guys they're not going to be a C tier like the Cutthroats. They're not going to be A tier because there is still quite a lot of restrictions on their use in the faction. So for me, I'm going to comfortably put these guys in the B tier because although they're limited in and the uses you can have for them, I think the uses that do exist for them are quite strong. So I'm going to put them in the B tier. Now we're going to move on to the Stormcrow Dervishes. So this is a unit that I think is also kind of seeing a little bit of a renaissance now, and I think the Brotherhood is definitely going to put these guys in the spotlight that they have not had on them for almost their entire existence. So looking at these guys, we can also go back to Beric Dondarrion, like we just talked about him a moment ago with the dogs, but everything that he does for them, he can do for these guys quite well, with the added bonus of charging something off of Sentinel and then using the Swift Strike ability of the Dervishes to then just get a free retreat out of them. So I think Beric is amazing in Stormcrow Dervishes. You could also look at Thoros. You could look at Thoros Commander, who would bring their already good morale of a 5+ to a 3+. You could use those faith tokens to give these guys Sundering and Vicious. And then if you're ambushing something, attacking it in the flank with Sundering and Vicious, you're giving that unit a Panicked and Weakened token as well to push additional damage through with the Panic token. And then you could throw Edric Dane in there with Thoros, because when he's attached to the unit Thoros is in, you can ignore attachment limits. So you can get kind of that dream combo, that Thornwatch combo of Swift Strike and Regroup out of Edric Dane here, making this unit extremely slippery and extremely deadly with quite a good amount of self-healing. And then we shouldn't forget that one of Thoros' faith abilities allows him to heal a unit, including his own unit, after a unit fails a panic test from being attacked. So these guys, I think, are really amazing in the Brotherhood faction. They also benefit from all of the movement-related tactics cards that I've discussed before. So for me, these guys are going to be our first S-tier unit. I think they're fantastic in the faction, and I think players are going to be able to do some really amazing things with them. Now, our next two units are going to be the other two Golden Company units. Our first are the Golden Company Swordsmen. Now, I really want to find a place for these guys, and I really want to love them in this faction, but I don't see the value that these guys are going to provide. Yes, they have adaptive style and could take a big hit one time in a round, getting themselves up to a 3+, 4+. That is useful, yes, but they are a 7-point unit. I think you can do a similar job tanking with other units. Also, the Brotherhood have a decent amount of healing, where I don't think you need to have a gigantic, tanky, beefy unit necessarily in the Brotherhood. And yeah, I'm just struggling to find a really great place for them. I don't think they're a B tier unit. Regrettably, I'm gonna have to throw these guys in the C tier. I just don't really see like a really obvious home for them. Now, if other people can think of something I'm not thinking of, I would be happy to have my mind changed. But unfortunately, I'm gonna put these guys in C. Now, the final Golden Company unit are the Golden Company Crossbowmen, a 7-point infantry unit. These guys have been seeing a lot of play, I would say, over the last year or so. I think the card itself hasn't really changed very much since the unit was released, but these guys have just been working their way into so many lists lately. With their Sentinel ability to move, to get a maneuver action or less often a charge, these guys are just able to keep themselves out of trouble or put themselves in a situation to cause trouble. And the Brotherhood has so many uses for a unit with Sentinel built into it, I think. So if we can look at some attachments. Looking at Hot Pie. Hot Pie is kind of a no-brainer attachment for your ranged unit because of his ability to remove a condition token from you when you activate. So with Hot Pie, you can almost guarantee that you're never going to be weakened when you activate to shoot something, which is pretty awesome. Tom 7 strings even. You could imagine putting Tom 7 strings into these guys and having them in long range of an enemy unit so that you're ready to shoot. But you're either going to cause that enemy you're going to force them to either have to make a long bomb charge into you, or they're going to just have to take a vulnerable and a weaken token. And most of the time, they're probably going to take those two tokens. So I think Tom 7 strings could be a good attachment in them to add to some of your token generation. Even just with no attachments, I think these guys are amazing in the Brotherhood. But if we look at Catelyn Stark, Lady Stoneheart, you could throw her into this unit to make them a very unappealing unit to attack with Horrific Visage and Intimidating Presence. Also, her Vengeance and Blood ability could come into play here with the Crossbowman. So if one of your other units is attacked, you can play that card to have Catelyn's unit, the Crossbowman, take a free shot at a unit. So I think they have some play with her. And I think they're a unit that doesn't even need, like I said, doesn't even need necessarily a certain attachment or a certain commander. I think they're just going to be useful in a lot of different situations as an alternative to taking the Brotherhood Archers. So for me, this is going to be our second S tier unit. I see a lot of play for the Golden Company Crossbowmen and think they have a really good home in the Brotherhood. Now our last combat unit are the House Bolton Flayedmen. So these guys are definitely going to be suffering from that Catelyn Stark opportunity cost here. So taking a look again at the Unending Vengeance card, if you run these guys, you're not running Lady Stoneheart Commander, you're not running Catelyn Stark NCU, and these guys are the same points as the Sworn Knights. They would kind of have a perfect home in a Catelyn Stark list, I think, but obviously you can't take this unit in that list. I don't think there's really enough justification to bring these guys over Sworn Knights in pretty much any situation. So for me, these guys are going to go into the C tier with the Cutthroats. Feel free to correct me in the comments if you think I'm missing something with these guys. I just don't think they're bringing enough to the table to displace the Sworn Knights for the same cost. And you're giving up most of your neutral allowance bringing them. So for me, they're going to go in the C tier. Alright, so now we're going to move on to our neutral NCUs. And neutral NCUs in this game, there's so many that are just so good. Most of these neutral NCUs see regular use in armies across the entire game. I'd say probably half of them see use just constantly. So chances are these guys are going to be ranking quite highly on this tier list. But we're going to start off first with Peter Baelish, Littlefinger. Now, he's a guy that allows you to take a zone that you may need for various kind of faction synergies, but then take the benefit of a zone you actually want. For example, in the Brotherhood, you're probably going to want to use Baelish to jump on the crown, but then take the benefit of the wealth zone or the swords. And due to the number of kind of crown dependent synergies in the Brotherhood, I think Peter is going to be kind of a no-brainer in a lot of lists. You're going to want to bring him to guarantee you get that crown control for certain rounds of the game when it's going to be really important for you. So for me, Peter is going to be an S tier pick for the Brotherhood. You could say he's somewhere between A and S, but I'm going to put him in the S tier. Next up, we have Roose Bolton, and he is going to fall victim to the Lady Stoneheart Unending Vengeance. So there's not a lot of real panic synergies with the faction outside of a Lady Stoneheart list. I don't see too many reasons for you to want to bring him other than a Lady Stoneheart list, but he can't join those lists. So for me, I'm going to put him in the C tier. He could even go to the D tier because I just am not seeing too many synergies for him. But I'm going to be a little conservative here and put him in the C tier, and with most of the rest of his Bolton brethren. Next, we're going to look at Jaqen H'ghar, who's kind of a little bit of a wild card NCU. You oftentimes bring him to possibly take advantage of a beneficial enemy influence or double down on your own influences. And I think it's that latter use where he's really going to come into his own in Brotherhood. So looking at a couple of the Brotherhood NCUs, they are influence NCUs. Catelyn Stark and Ghost of Highheart both have quite good influence abilities. So I think Jaqen H'ghar will give you the ability to really double dip those NCUs, those influence effects. So I would say Jaqen is going to be useful in most Brotherhood lists. I wouldn't necessarily say he's going to be included in most Brotherhood lists, but I think he has use in most Brotherhood lists because most of the time you're going to be bringing either Ghost of Highheart or Catelyn Stark NCU, if not both of them, probably one or the other. So I could see if you really wanted to lean into one of those influences, bringing Jaqen. So for me, he's going to be an A tier pick. Next up is Lord Varys, and Varys is a long time MVP in this game. There's really no bad reason. There's really no reason not to put him in a list if you've got space. If there's not another NCU you desperately need, Lord Varys is always a safe pick. He's also that utility third NCU that doesn't have to claim any zones to get benefit out of. He can be your pass NCU, and his tokens are going to do work for you. So he's easily, for me, going in the S tier. He's an NCU that will allow you to bring, like we mentioned earlier, you can bring those two influence NCUs who you need to take a board position and do something with, and Varys can be your third NCU and just sit there and pass. You can bring another NCU that you need on the board, an influence NCU, and Varys. He's just super useful, super versatile, so he's going in the S tier. Our last 4-point NCU is Shay. Now, she is in an interesting position. She is a very strong NCU. She's been seeing a lot of play since release. And she's, I think, very good in the Brotherhood and her ability to throw weakened tokens out. The Brotherhood has some very squishy units, especially when you're thinking about the Peasants or the Brotherhood Archers. So the ability to throw a weakened token out almost every round is quite powerful and really boosts the overall defensive strength of your army. She also does have the Restore 1 wound instead of a weakened token, which can come in handy from time to time. I was a little torn between throwing her in A or S tier, but I think in the Brotherhood, those weakened tokens are going to be extremely useful. So I'm going to throw her in the S tier. She could easily go into the A tier. So she's kind of like an A plus, I think, but I'm going to just push her up into the S tier. Our first 5-point NCU is Tycho Nestoris. Tycho is a unit that can kind of splash some heals on your army. Can really do a real big heal on one unit that you need to keep alive. He has 5 points, however, and the Brotherhood has a lot of different ways to heal. They have lots of little trickle healing effects, and I don't think there's necessarily a real great place for Tycho in this army. He's also a 5-point NCU. That's a lot of points. So for me, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Tycho. I think he's going to be a C tier. He's going to go down there with Roos and be in the C tier. And then our last NCU is Walder Frey. So Walder Frey is kind of falling into that unending vengeance character card opportunity cost question that we've bumped up against multiple times in this video. So Walder Frey is only going to be useful really in either a neutral-led list, a Barrack-led list, or a Thoros list with no Cat NCU. I don't see myself taking him that often. He does have some value in his ability to steal first player, but I think the conditions upon his use are just a little too great to make him a high probability pick. That said, I think his once per game does have enough use in those limited situations, or those limited list building situations where he could be brought. So I'm not going to throw him down in the C tier and consign him to the bottom of the list. I'm going to put him firmly kind of in the middle of the road there. So he's going to go in the B tier. Well, that does it for this Brotherhood Without Banners neutral tier list video. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and providing some feedback in the comments. If you want to further support the channel, please consider subscribing and checking out our Buy Me a Coffee page linked in the description. If you disagreed with any of my rankings, I'd be interested to hear in the comments why I oversold or undersold a particular unit. As of the publication of this video, we're just over a month away from the Brotherhood's release, and like most of you, I can't wait to get my hands on them. Until next time, this is Randall, signing off.